The view from the penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline was breathtaking, yet the only thing Mark could focus on was the way his wife's phone lit up on the marble counter. A notification she swiped away a fraction of a second too quickly. It was supposed to be a celebration of their 10th anniversary, but the air between them was thick with words unsaid and a name that had hovered like a ghost in their marriage for months. Lucas. Mark took a sip of his wine, tasting the bitterness of a secret he knew was about to be spoken aloud, shattering their curated perfection forever. If the quiet devastation of a love slowly breaking apart resonates with you, stay here. We are just beginning to peel back the layers of a betrayal that is as cold as the city outside. The rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Chicago penthouse didn't sound like rain. At this height, 40 stories up, it sounded more like static, a constant, low-frequency hum that isolated them from the rest of the world. Inside, the apartment was perfectly climate-controlled, smelling faintly of sandalwood and expensive red wine. But Mark felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He stood by the kitchen island, drying a crystal wine glass with a linen cloth. His movements were precise, methodical. He was an architect, after all. Structure and precision were the foundations of his life. Across the room, as Elena sat on the beige sectional, her legs tucked under her, staring at her phone. She hadn't looked at him in 20 minutes. "Mark?" Her voice was soft, carrying a tremor that stopped his hand mid-motion. He placed the glass down on the granite counter. The clink was the only sound in the room. He turned to face her. "Yes, Elena." She locked her phone and placed it face down on the coffee table. The screen went dark, but Mark knew who had been on the other end. He had seen the name Lucas pop up more times in the last 6 months than his own. Lucas, the college friend. Lucas, the struggling artist who understood her soul in a way Mark, with his blueprints and spreadsheets, apparently never could. "We need to talk," she said, smoothing the fabric of her dress over her knees. It was a nervous tick he hadn't seen since they were dating. "About us, about where I am." Mark leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He didn't approach her. He felt an instinctual need to keep the distance, to brace for impact. "I'm listening." Elena took a breath, her eyes darting to the window and then back to him. "I feel stifled, Mark. Not by you, exactly, but by this life. Everything is so predictable, so safe. I feel like I'm losing parts of myself that used to be vibrant." "Stifled," Mark repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Is this about the gallery? Or is this about Lucas?" Elena flinched. The name hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She didn't deny it. Instead, she straightened her posture, a defensive mechanism kicking in. "Lucas and I share a connection, Mark. You know that. It's artistic, spiritual. He sees the world differently. And lately, I've been wondering, what if I never really explored that side of myself? We got married so young. I went from my father's house to our dorm to this apartment." She stood up and walked toward him, stopping just out of reach. Her eyes were pleading, but there was a hardness in them too. The selfish determination of someone who believes they are the protagonist of every story. "I need freedom, Mark," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to sneak around. I respect you too much for that. I want a break, a pass, to see if that connection with Lucas is real, or if it's just a fantasy. I need to know." Mark looked at his wife. He looked at the woman he had built a life for, the woman whose student loans he had paid off, whose career he had championed. She wasn't asking for a divorce. She was asking for permission to audition his replacement while keeping him on retainer. She wanted the safety of his structure while she played in the chaos of another man's bed. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Elena expected anger. She expected him to shout, to forbid it, to fight for her. She was ready for the drama. She had rehearsed her arguments about modern love and autonomy. But Mark didn't shout. His heart hammered against his ribs, a dull, aching thud, but his face remained a mask of calm. He looked at the phone on the table, then back to her. He saw the anticipation in her eyes. She was already halfway out the door, her spirit already in Lucas's loft. "You want freedom," Mark stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation. "I need it to be sure about us," she said quickly, reaching for his hand. He let her take it, his skin cool against hers. "If I don't do this, I'll always resent you. I'll always wonder. I want to go to him, Mark, for a while. And if I come back, I'll be yours completely. No more doubts." If. The word was a blade. Mark gently withdrew his hand. He walked past her toward the hallway closet. "Mark?" Panic edged into her voice. "Where are you going?" He opened the closet and pulled out his weekender bag, the leather one she had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. He set it on the floor and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to go to him, Elena," Mark said, his voice terrifyingly steady. "You can stay here. I'll go." "What?" "No, Mark, that's not what I meant." "You want freedom," he interrupted, his eyes cold and clear. "I'm giving it to you, all of it." He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply started packing. Elena stood frozen in the living room. The victorious feeling she expected, replaced by a sudden, chilling draft. She had asked for an open door, but she hadn't expected Mark to walk through it first. Mark moved through the bedroom with the efficiency of a man clearing a crime scene. He didn't slam drawers or throw clothes. He folded his charcoal suits with precision, placing them into the garment bag alongside his crisp white shirts. Every movement was deliberate, a silent rebuke to the chaos Elena had just unleashed in the living room. Elena stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, watching him. She looked smaller now, the confident woman who had demanded freedom just moments ago replaced by someone witnessing a structure collapse faster than she had anticipated. "You don't have to pack the suits, Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's not like you're moving out forever. We set a break, a few weeks to gain perspective." Mark didn't look up. He reached for his DOP kit from the bathroom counter, sliding his razor and cologne inside. "You asked for space, Elena. I'm ensuring you have it. All of it." "But where will you go?" she asked, stepping into the room. "The Four Seasons? Your brother's place in the suburbs?" He finally paused, zipping the leather bag shut. The sound was sharp, final. He turned to her, his expression devoid of the warmth she was used to manipulating. "That doesn't concern you anymore. That's the point of freedom, isn't it? No accountability." He walked past her to the nightstand and picked up his phone. For a moment, Elena thought he was going to check a message, but his fingers moved through the settings with practiced speed. A second later, a soft ping echoed from Elena's phone in her pocket. Then another. Then a third. She pulled her device out, staring at the screen. Mark has stopped sharing his location with you. Mark has left the shared album, Our Life. Mark has removed you from the joint calendar. The color drained from her face. These were small digital threads, invisible tethers that had bound them together for a decade. Seeing them snap, one by one, felt more violent than if he had smashed a vase against the wall. "Mark," she whispered, looking up at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Why are you doing that? You're acting like we're divorcing. I just said I needed to explore this connection with Lucas. I told you, I want to come back to you. Why are you deleting everything?" "Because you can't have both, Elena," Mark said, his voice low and even. He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. "You wanted to live in a world where your choices didn't have consequences. You wanted me to sit here, tracking your location, waiting for you to come home after you'd finished with him. You wanted a safety net." He hoisted the bag onto his shoulder and picked up his briefcase. The weight of it felt grounding. "I am not a safety net," he continued, walking toward the bedroom door. "I am your husband, or I was, but I won't be your backup plan." Elena scrambled backward to let him pass, following him out into the hallway. The expansive apartment, usually so warm with the evening lights of Chicago filtering in, felt cavernous. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice rising in tone, pitch, desperate for him to crack, to yell, to show something. "You're trying to punish me because I was honest with you." Mark stopped at the front door. He placed his set of keys on the console table, the small marble table where they had sorted mail together for 5 years. He looked at the keys, then at the sprawling living room, and finally at her. "I'm not punishing you," Mark said. "I'm respecting you. You made a choice, now I'm making mine." He opened the heavy oak door. The hallway air was cooler, carrying the scent of industrial cleaner and indifference. "Mark, please," Elena said, tears finally spilling over. "Don't leave like this. Just sleep in the guest room. Let's talk in the morning." "Good luck, Elena," he said. He stepped out and pulled the door shut. He didn't slam it. He simply closed it until the latch clicked, a mechanical, decisive sound that echoed in the silent corridor. Mark walked toward the elevator, his footsteps absorbed by the plush runner. He didn't look back at the door. He pressed the down button, and as the steel doors slid open, he stepped into the empty car. He caught his reflection in the mirrored paneling. He looked tired, pale, but strangely lighter. He took his phone out one last time, navigated to his contacts, and scrolled down to Elena. His thumb hovered over the screen for a heartbeat. Then he pressed block caller. The elevator began its descent, taking him down to the street, into the dark, wet city that was now the only companion he had left. 3 days into her freedom, Elena woke up to the smell of stale turpentine and old coffee. She lay still for a moment, staring at the exposed brick ceiling of Lucas's loft in Wicker Park. In her memory, the version of this place she had romanticized during her marriage. The loft was bohemian and raw, a sanctuary of creativity. But in the harsh light of a Tuesday morning, it was simply dirty. The sheets were graying, not the crisp, high thread count Egyptian cotton Mark insisted on changing every 3 days. Beside her, Lucas was sprawled out, taking up 3/4 of the mattress, his mouth slightly open, snoring with a congested rattle. Elena carefully slid out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold, gritty wooden floor. She shivered. The heating in the building was temperamental, another charming quirk that felt significantly less charming when it was 40 degrees outside. She walked to the kitchenette. a corner of the room separated by a waist-high counter covered in empty takeout boxes and sketches. She longed for the hum of the espresso machine in the penthouse, the way Mark would have a cup waiting for her on the counter, black at exactly 7:00 a.m. Here there was only instant coffee and a carton of almond milk that had expired 2 days ago. "You're up early?" a groggy voice rasped from the bed. Elena turned. Lucas was rubbing his eyes, his hair a chaotic mess. He looked boyish, the quality she had always found endearing, compared to Mark's stoic maturity. "I have to get to the gallery," Elena said, tightening the sash of her silk robe. It felt out of place here, too expensive for the surroundings. "I have a donor walkthrough at 10. "Ugh, capitalism," Lucas groaned, rolling over. "Hey, babe, can you pick up some groceries on your way back tonight? And maybe some wine? The good stuff. I'm feeling inspired. I might paint late." He didn't offer to pay. He didn't offer to make her breakfast. He didn't ask how she slept. He simply assumed she would provide, just as she had provided validation for his art for years. But now, without Mark's credit card paying the mortgage elsewhere, the request felt heavy. "Sure," Elena said, her voice tight. "I'll grab something." She went to the bathroom, a tiny space with a shower curtain that had mold creeping up the bottom hem, and turned on the water. It took 5 minutes to get lukewarm. As she stood under the weak spray, she closed her eyes, trying to summon the thrill of the affair, the electricity that used to crackle between them when they met for secret lunches. It was gone. The illicit spark had been extinguished by the mundane reality of his mildewed shower curtain. She had blown up her life for a fantasy that couldn't survive the morning light. 5 miles south, in a suite on the 25th floor of the Langham Hotel, Mark was tying his tie. The room was impersonal, decorated in shades of cream and taupe, devoid of any personal artifacts. It was the kind of room designed for transient businessmen, people passing through without leaving a mark. For the first time in 10 years, Mark felt like he belonged to himself. He checked his reflection in the full-length mirror. His suit was impeccable. He looked tired. The circles under his eyes were dark. But the tension that usually held his shoulders near his ears had dissipated. For months, his mornings had been a minefield of managing Elena's moods. Was she happy? Was she distant? Was she texting him? He had spent years walking on eggshells, trying to be enough to keep her from drifting. Now, in the silence of the hotel room, there was no one to manage. He walked to the desk where his laptop sat open. He had worked until 2:00 a.m. revising the blueprints for the Hudson project. The work was clean, logical. Structures didn't lie. Load-bearing walls didn't ask for space while relying on you to keep the roof up. He picked up his phone. Habit, ingrained over a decade, made his thumb hover over the messaging app. He wanted to check if she was okay. He wanted to know if she had remembered her allergy medication. "Stop," he told himself. He set the phone down. That was the agreement. Freedom. He walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago River, winding like a dark ribbon through the canyon of steel. He felt a pang of loneliness so sharp it almost doubled him over, a physical ache in the center of his chest. He missed the smell of her hair. He missed the sound of her voice, even when she was complaining. But beneath the loneliness, there was something else. A strange, quiet clarity. The anxiety was gone. The fear of losing her was gone, because he had already lost her. Mark grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. He didn't look back at the unmade bed. The maid would take care of it. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to fix the mess someone else had made. The conference room at Sterling and Vance Architects was encased in glass, suspended 20 stories above the street like a floating aquarium. Inside, the air was stagnant, recycled, and heavy with the scent of lukewarm coffee and high-stakes anxiety. Mark stood at the head of the mahogany table, his hand resting on the A1 blueprints of the Hudson Spire. He had been awake for 19 hours. His eyes felt gritty, as if sand had been rubbed into the lids, but his mind was running on a cold, frantic energy. Since leaving the apartment, work had become his narcotic. If he stopped moving, if he stopped calculating loads and wind shears, he would have to think about the silence in his hotel room. "The cantilever is non-negotiable," Mark said, his voice flat. He didn't look at the junior developers around the table. He looked at the lines on the paper. Clean, absolute, true. It defines the silhouette. If we pull it back, it's just another glass box. I won't build a box. "The city won't approve the air rights, Mark," one of the partners, David, sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're already pushing the zoning variance. The legal team says it's a suicide mission." "Then get a better legal team," Mark snapped. He regretted the tone immediately, but his patience was frayed, worn thin by sleepless nights and the phantom sensation of his phone not ringing. The glass door opened. The room went quiet. A woman walked in, followed by the faint click of heels on the polished concrete floor. She wasn't wearing the standard-issue gray suit of the corporate drones Mark was used to. She wore a tailored navy dress that looked sharp enough to cut glass, and she carried a leather portfolio, not a laptop. "I'm the better legal team," she said. Her voice was calm, carrying a resonance that cut through the tension in the room without raising its volume. David straightened up. "Nora, we didn't expect you until 2. "I prefer to be early. It gives me time to see the problems before they're presented as solutions," she said. She extended a hand toward Mark. "Nora Bennett, Senior Counsel for the Zoning Commission." Mark took her hand. Her grip was firm, dry, and brief. She didn't smile. A professional courtesy he appreciated. She looked him in the eye, and for a second, Mark felt a jolt of recognition. Not sexual, but something sharper. She had the same look in her eyes that he saw in the mirror lately. Guarded, efficient, tired of incompetence. "Mark Sterling," he said. "I know," Nora replied. She walked to the table and looked down at the blueprints. She didn't pretend to study them. She read them. Her eyes scanned the elevations with the speed of someone who understood the language of space. "The cantilever," she said, tapping the section Mark had just been defending. "It extends 6 feet over the easement line. That's why the board is blocking you." "It's an architectural necessity," Mark argued, his defenses going up. "It balances the visual weight of the spire." "It's a lawsuit waiting to happen," Nora corrected, not looking up. "But if you angle the structural support by 4 degrees and reclassify the overhang as a decorative architectural feature rather than habitable space under Section 12B, you bypass the easement restriction entirely." The room fell silent again. Mark stared at her. She hadn't just found a loophole. She had understood the integrity of his design and found a way to protect it legally. It was a level of competence he hadn't encountered in months. He looked at the blueprints, tracing the line she suggested in his mind. 4 degrees. It would actually improve the wind resistance. "Section 12B, Mark repeated, a ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. It wasn't happiness, but it was respect. I thought that was for historical preservation. It is, Nora said, finally looking up at him. Her eyes were a dark, intelligent hazel. But you're building a landmark, aren't you? Let's argue it as future history. She pulled a chair out and sat down, opening her portfolio. Now sit down, Mr. Sterling. We have a lot of paperwork to rewrite if you want to keep your vision. Mark sat. For the next 3 hours, they worked. He watched her dissect the city code with the same precision he applied to steel and glass. She was relentless, unsentimental, and brilliant. There was no emotional labor here. She didn't need him to reassure her. She didn't need him to carry her. She met him exactly where he was, at the level of the work. As the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the table, Mark realized something terrifying. He hadn't checked his phone once. He hadn't thought about Elena or Lucas or the empty apartment. He looked at Nora, who was highlighting a clause with a yellow marker. "You're good at this," he said quietly. Nora didn't pause. "I know," she said. "So are you. That's why I'm here." It was the first time in a long time Mark felt seen not for what he provided, but for who he was. 2 weeks into the separation, the romantic bohemian lighting of the loft had lost its charm, replaced by the flickering harshness of a bulb that Lucas promised to change 4 days ago. Elena sat at the chipped kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen. The insufficient funds notification from her personal checking account blinked back at her like a red accusation. Before the separation, money had been an abstraction, a seamless flow managed by Mark. He handled the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, and the investments. Elena simply lived. Now, reality was billing her by the hour. "Lucas?" she called out. Lucas was in the corner of the room, headphones on, vigorously applying crimson paint to a canvas. He didn't hear her, or he chose not to. He had been in the zone for 3 days, which mostly meant he ignored the pile of dishes in the sink and the fact that they were out of toilet paper. Elena rubbed her temples. The skylight was leaking again. A rhythmic drip, drip, drip into a plastic bucket that was driving her to the brink of insanity. She picked up her phone. Her thumb moved automatically to Mark's contact. She told herself it was necessary. She needed the login for the joint insurance portal. It was administrative. It was harmless. But as the phone rang, her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't just calling for a password. She was calling to hear a voice that sounded like stability. Ring, ring, ring. He usually picked up on the first ring. It went to voicemail. "You have reached Mark Sterling. Please leave a message." Elena hung up. She felt a sharp, unreasonable spike of anger. He was punishing her. He had to be. She waited 2 minutes and dialed again. This time the line clicked open. "This is Mark." His voice was clipped, professional, devoid of the warmth she had taken for granted for a decade. Background noise hummed behind him, the clatter of silverware, the low murmur of a restaurant. "Mark? It's me," Elena said, her voice softening instinctively. "I know," he replied. "Is it an emergency?" "No, I just needed the password for the State Farm account. My car insurance is up for renewal and I can't find the paperwork. I emailed you a document with all relevant passwords the day I left, Elena. Subject line: Administrative handover." Elena bit her lip. She hadn't opened it. Opening it felt too final. I know, I can't find it right now. Can you just tell me? Please? There was a pause. She heard him sigh, not a sigh of affection, but the impatient exhale of a man interrupted during important business. It's Sterling Secure 88, capital S, he recited. Anything else? Where are you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. It sounds busy. I'm at dinner, Mark said. Oh. With who, David? A colleague, Mark said. He didn't elaborate. He offered no details, no story about his day, no complaint about the traffic. The intimacy of small talk was gone. Mark, the leak in the skylight here is getting worse, Elena said, her voice cracking slightly. She hated herself for saying it, for bringing the mess of her affair into his clean life. But she was desperate for him to care. I don't know who to call. Lucas doesn't know any contractors. That sounds like a landlord issue, Elena, Mark said, his tone icy. Or a Lucas issue. It's not a husband issue. The rejection hit her harder than a physical blow. I just thought you might know someone. I do know someone, Mark said, but I'm not your property manager anymore. You wanted independence. Figuring out how to fix a leak is part of that. Why are you being so cold? She whispered. I'm not being cold. I'm being gone. There is a difference. Mark, I have to go, Elena. My dinner is getting cold. Check your email for the passwords. Click. The line went dead. Elena slowly lowered the phone. The silence of the loft rushed back in, punctuated only by the maddening drip, drip, drip of the leak. She looked over at Lucas, who was now nodding his head to music she couldn't hear, completely oblivious to her distress. She realized then, with a sinking horror, what she had done. She had traded a man who would have moved mountains to keep her dry for a boy who couldn't be bothered to empty a bucket. Mark wasn't pining for her. He wasn't waiting by the phone. He was at dinner, living a life that no longer had space for her problems. Elena put her head in her hands. The freedom felt less like flying and more like falling. Mark slid his phone back into his jacket pocket as he walked back to the table. The device felt heavy, burdened by the ghost of Elena's voice and her trivial complaints about a leaking skylight. He took a breath, composing himself, smoothing the invisible creases of irritation from his brow before re-entering the warm, amber glow of the dining room. Nora was waiting where he had left her. She hadn't checked her phone. She was simply sitting, a glass of Pinot Noir in her hand, watching the snow fall gently against the window pane of the restaurant. There was a stillness to her that Mark found arresting. She didn't need to be entertained. She didn't need to be managed. Everything all right? She asked as he sat down. Her voice was low, carrying no demand for details, only a polite inquiry. Fine, Mark said, picking up his napkin. Just maintenance. Nora took a sip of her wine, her eyes assessing him over the rim of the glass. Old buildings require a lot of upkeep, she observed dryly, though Mark knew she wasn't talking about the Hudson Spire. Sometimes the structural damage isn't worth the cost of the retrofit. Mark looked at her, surprised. Then a laugh bubbled up in his chest, a genuine rusty sound that felt foreign in his throat. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a release. You might be right, he admitted. The waiter arrived to clear their plates. The rhythm of the dinner was seamless. They moved from discussing the zoning laws to architecture, and then to art. Mark found himself talking about the Bauhaus movement with a passion he hadn't felt in years. With Elena, conversations about his work were always one-sided. She would nod, eyes glazing over, waiting for him to finish so she could talk about the gallery drama or Lucas's latest existential crisis. With Nora, it was a tennis match. She challenged him. She corrected him on a date regarding a court ruling that affected historical facades. She was his equal. As the espresso arrived, the conversation lulled into a comfortable silence. Mark rested his left hand on the white tablecloth. The platinum band on his ring finger caught the candlelight. For 10 years, the ring had felt like a part of his skin. It was a symbol of honor, of a promise he had intended to keep until he died. But tonight, looking at it against the crisp white linen, it looked like a shackle. He thought about Elena in the loft, helpless and demanding. He thought about the freedom she had requested, which was really just permission to hurt him without guilt. And then he looked at Nora, who was looking out the window, self-sufficient and whole. Mark realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that he didn't miss his wife. He missed the idea of her. He missed the routine. But he didn't miss the person who had called him tonight to fix a leak while sleeping in another man's bed. Slowly, deliberately, Mark used his right hand to twist the platinum band. It resisted slightly. It had been there a long time. But then it slid over the knuckle. The skin underneath was pale, a thin strip of white flesh that hadn't seen the sun in a decade. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't slam it on the table. He simply closed his hand over the metal, feeling the cold, hard circle in his palm, and then slipped it into his trouser pocket. Nora turned back from the window. Her gaze dropped to his hand, then up to his eyes. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a woman who saw everything. She didn't ask. She didn't offer sympathy. She simply raised her espresso cup in a subtle, almost imperceptible toast. "To the Hudson Project," she said softly, "and new foundations." Mark picked up his own cup, the ceramic feeling strange and new against his bare finger. The phantom weight was gone, replaced by a sense of possibility that made the air in the room feel thinner, easier to breathe. "To new foundations," Mark replied. For the first time in months, when he smiled, it reached his eyes. The grand ballroom of the Art Institute of Chicago was a cavern of marble and light, echoing with the soft clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of the city's elite. It was the unveiling of the Hudson Spire design, the night Mark had been working toward for 2 years. Elena stood at the edge of the room, clutching her beaded clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wore the emerald silk gown Mark had bought her for their 8th anniversary. It was a calculated choice, a visual reminder of their history, a signal that she was ready to step back into her role as the architect's wife. Things with Lucas had imploded 3 days ago in a screaming match about rent money and stifled creativity. Elena had packed a bag and stayed at a hotel, soothing herself with the certainty that Mark would be relieved to have her back. She had rehearsed her speech. She would be gracious. She would tell him she had found herself, and she would forgive him for the silence of the last few months. She scanned the crowd, looking for the familiar stoop of his shoulders, the tired posture of the man who carried the weight of the world. She didn't see that man. Instead, she saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. In the center of the room, near the scale model of the spire, Mark was holding court. He stood tall, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing as he spoke to a circle of investors. He wasn't brooding. He wasn't scanning the room looking for her. He was laughing. It was a full, resonant sound that cut through the ambient noise, a sound Elena hadn't heard in years. It stopped her cold. Standing next to him, close enough that their arms brushed occasionally, was a woman Elena didn't know. She was striking, wearing a severe architectural black dress that commanded attention without asking for it. Her hair was pulled back in a sharp chignon, revealing a neck that held her head high. Elena watched, paralyzed, as the woman, Nora, leaned in and whispered something to Mark. Mark smiled, a private, intimate expression, and nodded. The synchronicity between them was terrifying. They moved like a single unit, a binary star system orbiting the same center of gravity. Elena felt a surge of panic. This wasn't the script. He was supposed to be the grieving husband, not the conquering hero. She forced her legs to move. She had to break the tableau. She had to remind him of who she was. Mark? Her voice was thinner than she intended, swallowed by the acoustics of the room. She stepped closer, invading the circle. Mark. The conversation died. The investors looked at her with polite confusion. Mark turned. His smile didn't drop, but the warmth evaporated from his eyes instantly. It was like watching a shutter close. He looked at her not with anger and not with love, but with the polite recognition one gives a distant acquaintance. Elena, he said. His voice was steady. I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to be here for you, Elena said, the rehearsed lines suddenly feeling clumsy in her mouth. She glanced at the investors, trying to smile. It's a big night for us. Us. The word hung in the air, presumptuous and false. Mark didn't correct her in front of the clients. He simply didn't acknowledge the plural. He turned slightly toward the woman in black. Elena, have you met Nora Bennett? Mark asked. His tone was casual, but his body language was a fortress. He angled himself so that he was standing shoulder to shoulder with Nora, presenting a united front. Nora is the legal counsel who saved the Spire, and my partner. He didn't specify business partner. He didn't have to. The energy between them spoke volumes. Nora extended a hand. Her expression was cool, unreadable. Mrs. Sterling, Mark has mentioned you. Mark has mentioned you. Past tense, as if she were a footnote in a history book that had already been closed. Elena took the hand, her skin burning. I'm his wife, she blurted out, a desperate attempt to reclaim her territory. Nora didn't flinch. She withdrew her hand gracefully. I know, she said softly. The papers are being finalized, aren't they? Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Mark, wide-eyed. Mark? What is she talking about? Mark stepped forward, creating a physical barrier between Elena and the rest of the group. This isn't the place, Elena, he said, his voice low. But since you're here, the courier went to the apartment this morning. I filed yesterday. Filed? Elena whispered. But I'm back. I'm here. You're a guest here, Elena, Mark said. It wasn't cruel, it was simply a statement of fact. And I have a keynote to deliver. He adjusted his cuffs. Enjoy the party. The champagne is excellent. He turned his back on her. He placed a hand on the small of Nora's back, a gesture of possessive, protective familiarity, and guided her toward the podium. Elena stood alone in the middle of the crowd. The emerald dress felt heavy, a costume for a play that had been canceled weeks ago. She watched them walk away, realizing with a sick, hollow thud in her chest that she wasn't the protagonist of this story anymore. She was just a spectator. The morning sun hit the limestone facade of the apartment building with a brilliance that felt mocking. Inside the penthouse, the light spilled across the hardwood floors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. Elena sat on the edge of the beige sectional, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had used her key to get in, a small victory she had clung to. He hasn't changed the locks, she had told herself. That means there's still a door open. She had been waiting for 2 hours. The apartment was exactly as she had left it, yet it felt completely alien. It was too clean. The stack of architectural magazines that usually cluttered the coffee table was gone. The smell of Mark's espresso, dark, rich, and grounding, was absent, replaced by the sterile scent of unused space. It felt less like a home and more like a staging area for a life that had already moved elsewhere. She checked her watch. 9:15 a.m. He would come. He had to come. After last night, after the cold humiliation of the gala, she needed him to yell at her. She needed him to break his composure so she could find a crack to slip back into. Indifference was a smooth wall. She couldn't climb it. But anger? Anger was connection. The buzzer rang. Elena jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. She smoothed her skirt, a modest, soft gray wool she thought made her look approachable, repentant. She walked to the door, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked tired, pale, but hopeful. She opened the door. "Mark, I think we—" The words died on her lips. Standing in the hallway was not her husband. It was a young man in a blue uniform, holding a thick, rigid envelope and a digital scanner. "Delivery for Elena Sterling?" the couriers asked, chewing gum with a rhythmic, indifferent motion. Elena blinked, the disappointment crashing down on her so heavily she had to grip the doorframe. "Yes, that's me." "Sign here, please." He thrust the scanner at her. She signed with a trembling finger, the stylus slipping on the glass screen. "Thanks. Have a good one." He handed her the envelope and turned to leave, the heavy elevator doors swallowing him up a moment later. Elena stood alone in the doorway, the envelope heavy in her hand. It had the logo of a law firm embossed in the corner. Bennett, Sterling and Associates. She walked back into the living room and sat down. Her fingers fumbled with the tab. She tore it open. Inside, the paperwork was thick, crisp, and devastatingly thorough. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. There was no letter. No handwritten note explaining his feelings. No, "I'm sorry it came to this." Just the cold, hard legal language of division. Assets, liabilities, alimony waivers, which she had foolishly signed years ago in a prenup she never thought would matter. And then she saw the date. He hadn't filed this morning. He hadn't filed after the gala. The date next to his signature, sharp, angular, unwavering, was from 3 weeks ago. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. He hadn't been waiting. He hadn't been confused. While she was playing house with Lucas, complaining about leaks and dreaming of a dramatic reconciliation, Mark had been methodically, quietly dismantling their legal existence. He had grieved, processed, and executed the end of their marriage before she even realized it was in danger. She looked around the penthouse. It wasn't just quiet. It was vacant. She realized now why the magazines were gone, why the closet door stood slightly ajar, revealing empty hangers. He hadn't just moved out. He had moved on. Elena dropped the papers onto the coffee table. They fanned out, white sheets covering the dark wood. She looked at the window, at the sprawling Chicago skyline Mark loved so much. Somewhere out there, in a glass tower he had designed, he was working. He was building something new. He was probably drinking coffee with Nora, discussing easements and variances, his ring finger bare and light. Freedom, she whispered to the empty room. The word echoed off the walls, hollow and terrifying. She had asked for freedom to find herself. She had gotten exactly what she asked for. She was free of him. She was free of the marriage. She was free of the safety net. Elena pulled her knees up to her chest and wept, the sound small and insignificant in the vast, perfectly designed silence of the life she had deleted.